Greetings everyone, I am the Rixer, and you are watching my God of War NG Plus speedrun in 1 hour 17 minutes and 57 seconds. This was played on the PS3 version of the game. The reason we play on the PS3 version is because the loads are a lot faster, and there are a few exclusive tricks to the PS3 version that don't work on the PS2 version. I'll explain more about why it's NG Plus and why I'm using the costume that I'm using, but the first thing I'm going to clear out is the reason the video is 56 minutes when the speedrun is 1 hour and 17. God of War has notably unskippable cutscenes that you can't do anything about, you just have to sit there and watch them, and unfortunately, for this post-commentary run, it would be very boring for me if you were to watch all the cutscenes. They take up about 20 minutes over the course of the run, so I decided to cut out most of the important ones. Because I like to do the introduction, I kept the first cutscene in, and I'll keep a few more cutscenes in if I have stuff to talk about, or stuff to explain. So while I'm doing this first fight, it's very hard to understand what's going on at an advanced level, but I just need to defeat 12 enemies here, and the hatch will open, and I can advance to the next part of the game. So the reason I'm doing, or I'm using the Tycoonius costume, which is the businessman costume, is because this actually does change parts of the game, and it's also referred to as New Game Plus to use this costume. You need to beat the game once, and then you need to do the Challenge of the Gods, which is like 10 hard challenges you have to do, and it unlocks all the costumes. The costumes all do different things, and this one in particular gives you 4 times the amount of experience that you would usually get for defeating enemies and opening chests and destroying objects. You get 4 times the amount of orbs. You deal twice the damage, but you also take twice the damage, so it's more like a glass cannon run. You still have to upgrade all the abilities, but you can get very early abilities, so you can see I'm getting a lot of orbs from defeating this first Hydra. So there's 3 phases to the Hydra. That's the first one, that's Hydra 1. I need these orbs later to upgrade one of my abilities to gain the faster movement tech. And this is the hardest part about the entire run. It's the most RNG part. It's basically out of my control, and I'll show you why. So you need to run to and open this door right here. And then you need to hope for a harpy to home in on you and attack you whenever you're blocking in midair. Sometimes they charge at you, and you can get them to get stuck up above the fence. Grab the harpy that's stuck above the fence and skip the second Hydra part. So normally there's a Hydra that's supposed to pop up in the middle of the boat there, but because we do that skip, we completely skip the second Hydra. So this is a 30-second cutscene I thought I'd put in just because the beginning of the run is very hectic and it's very difficult to know what's going on exactly just because everything's moving so fast. So I thought I'd keep it in. So I'll start talking about the next skip. Coming up is the box skip. So normally right here you see how the ledge in this cutscene is pretty high up, and you can't really reach these archers unless you push a box towards the guys. Well, you can actually do a pretty crazy jump where you use the triangle launcher, you swing in the air, and you get a double jump out of it, like so. And I got it first try in this run. So you do that, and you skip the box completely. Now this is one of the most groundbreaking glitches in the whole run, I think. So this is the Hydra 3 skip. So this was actually a pretty good C until I got walled out by these enemies here. Whenever you defeat one of the enemies, a new one spawns on the upper rope. So because of these enemies, I got a bit bad luck, and I lost a bit of time. So you might be wondering what I'm doing right here. I'm basically jumping out of bounds, and the only way to get out of bounds in that part is by jumping all the way to the top of that boat. And that skips behind the door, where you would have to, normally you'd need a key for that door, and you'd need to defeat the third Hydra to do so. You unlock the door and you get the cutscene, but you can jump behind it with that out of bounds, but you do need to climb all the ropes. So there's a long 2-minute cutscene right after the opening area. I obviously skipped that with editing, and here we have the sex minigame, which is kind of amusing to watch the first time you see this run. The sex minigame, the reason we do it in the run is actually because we get a lot of orbs. The orbs allows us to upgrade the Blades of Chaos. And as you see by this little tutorial here, now we get the Hermes Rush, and the Hermes Rush allows us to do our first advanced movement technique called roll dash canceling. So normally, as you saw before, I was doing quick rolling, which is basically just holding the roll direction and mashing X. Now we can cancel the roll animation with the shoulder dash animation together to do the fastest form of movement. So entering Athens, we're going to do an out of bounds within the first 2 seconds by grabbing the sledge and restarting the checkpoint. The game gets confused and doesn't know where to put it, so it puts us underwater instead. So conveniently, there's an out of bounds behind the level here that you can go to. And when you go behind here and go under this bridge, normally Kratos is not supposed to be able to use the diving animation until you get Poseidon's Trident 30 minutes into this run. But because you do that diving animation, you can swim up through the boat and you can swim in the air. And this is what's called the swimming glitch. It's a common theme in all God of War games to be able to swim in the air, and they all skip some parts of the game, but in God of War 1, it is the most major out of all of them, as far as I know. This is the only God of War that I run, but from what I've heard, it's the one that skips the most. So you can usually use the swimming glitch to skip right into Athens, but what we're going to do is we're going to make a small detour, and we're going to get an ability called Medusa's Gaze. Medusa's Gaze is an ability that allows you to freeze enemies, and they tell you about that in this cutscene, but again, with editing, I'm going to skip it. So this fight is the most notable, obviously glaring mistake in the run. I lose about 10 seconds here in this fight. I actually get a very good Medusa fight. It's kind of random whenever she decides to get knocked up into the air. So you have to grab her whenever you deal enough damage to her, and then you do this quick time event. I accidentally slip a bit on the control stick, and I fail the quick time event, losing me about 10 seconds. Otherwise, this beginning game would have been really good. So believe it or not, this is actually the biggest mistake in the run, is that those 10 seconds I lose from that. Other than that, there's nothing really super obvious besides some movement flaws and a tiny bit of tricks that I missed later on. So right here, we actually go out of bounds. And the reason we do that is not only is it faster to skip that fight completely, but it also activates what's called the magic regeneration glitch. The magic regeneration glitch is what it is. It allows us to get infinite magic. So what the game does there is it wants us normally it wants us to stone all those enemies in that tutorial fight, and because the game thinks we're gonna, mess up the fight, the game gives us infinite magic for that little tutorial bit, so we can get used to the ability and we can play around with it a little bit, so we don't run out of magic there. But because we go out of bounds, we actually get the ability for the rest of the run, and it will come in handy, I will tell you. It most definitely will. So now what we're doing is, now that we got Medusa's Gaze, we're heading back to the spot where we do the swimming glitch. Now you might ask, how do we do the swimming glitch the second time? Considering we can't go back and grab the boat and do the checkpoint thing. Well, there's actually conveniently an out of bounds under this bridge. By doing the L1X attack before I hit the water and doing it again one time, I can clip out of bounds and I can do the exact same out of bounds just as before. And now begins a 4-minute long swimming section through Athens where I will be hitting every single checkpoint trigger or loading trigger so I can get to the next part of the game. Because if you just try to swim to the end of Athens, nothing loads. That's just how games in this era work. You have to touch a part of the level for the next part to load. So for this little bit, you saw that I swam a little bit over to the left. That is to load this part of the level. I also swim a bit straight up here. And it's kind of funny. Normally, these enemies, you see how they're falling out of the sky? There's normally supposed to be a rope where I fight those enemies there. And I'm supposed to like kick them off the rope, and I'm supposed to do a bunch of quick time events. I have to do none of that. And they just, because there's no rope there, they just fall down. So it's just really funny to look at. One quick thing I'm doing while I'm swimming is I'm double tapping select to reset the camera. Camera changes are a very essential part about this swimming section. Well, first of all, it makes you able to see where you're going, but it also loads specific other parts of the level. This is very confusing to know exactly. It's very confusing to know what exactly I'm doing if you've never seen this run before. But all you need to know is that you're supposed to do a bunch of platforming. You're supposed to do a bunch of forced fights. You're supposed to make your way through Athens and fight some Cyclopses, fight some bad dudes and stuff like that. But we have to do none of that because we can just swim right through all of it. So at this part, there's something called a mid-level loading screen. I'll be referring to these throughout the run, and what I'm doing right here is I'm upgrading my Medusa's Gaze, which I need to be level 2 by the time I enter the desert. The reason I'm doing it here is because the game likes to load in specific areas. Because the next part of the game here is pretty heavy on the PS3's loading memory, the game stops you dead in its tracks to load the next part of the level. So it stops you dead in its tracks for about 4 seconds, and you can use those 4 seconds when the game is loading to upgrade your abilities. So you're kind of knocking out 2 birds with 1 stone here. I'll be doing that every single time there is a loading screen. You'll see what a mid-level loading looks like because later on I will be upgrading my abilities, but there's still going to be a bit of loading left because I don't want to over-upgrade my ability, or so to say. So yeah, once again, there's a cutscene kind of lower kind of on the lower part of this temple, but because I'm swimming so high up, I never see the cutscene at all. And there's another cutscene that you have to see here where you get quote-unquote introduced to the Harpies. There's always a cutscene in this game where they show most of the main enemies off, but if you hug the ceiling here in the door frame, you can skip right above it, and you never get introduced to the Harpies. But yeah, the game likes to introduce every single enemy. Not every single enemy, but most of the main enemies in a cutscene. They happen in kind of random spots. It's not exactly the first time you see them, but it just kind of does it. So we need to get out of bounds here. This is the part where you're supposed to save the Oracle. Once again, because we're in the swimming glitch, we can just go out of bounds, go beneath the big open area, the open park, I guess you could call it, and swim right over to the sewers. I want to mention that this swimming glitch saves God knows how much time. It's probably, I think, there's a swimless category in this game, and the swimless category is about 15 minutes slower, which the swimless category implies that you never use the swimming glitch. So we skip about 15 minutes of gameplay just from that alone. So this was an interesting clip that just happened. Normally what happens there is when you trigger the music on the sword and you swim back to the area you were before, the game loads you into the sewers instead of back to where you were before. And it kind of warped me to the wrong spot, but then it warped me to the sewers again. I've never had that happen before, but it just happened in this run. I did lose about 2 seconds from that, but it's not a big deal. I just kept the run going. So because there's a little puddle of water at the beginning of the sewers, we can cancel the swimming glitch. And when we cancel the swimming glitch, we can do a bunch of roll dash canceling through the sewers. And right here you see me defeat these 2 Cyclopses. The Cyclopses drop a lot, and I mean a lot of orbs. You see how I basically get several hundreds of orbs right here. What I want is I want at least one of the Cyclopses to give me good orbs. There's a big variety and range that the orbs can drop, so it's one of the other bits of RNG in this run, besides the Harpies at the start, is the amount of orbs you get from the Cyclopses. The first Cyclops gave me good orbs, so I have nothing to worry about for the rest of this run. If you don't get good orbs, you will not be able to upgrade Medusa's Gaze before you enter the desert, which we are going to do in a very short amount of time. So there's a mid-level loading screen right here. It's not very long, so I only upgrade Medusa's Gaze by about 400 or 500. And there's another one coming up in about 10 seconds where I do the same thing. Right here, there's 3 very short loading screens, or mid-level loadings, back to back. So there's 400 there as well, and I upgrade the last 700 because the game has to load the Desert of Lost Souls. So in the Desert of Lost Souls, in the story, you normally have to defeat the sirens, so you can open the door and traverse through the Desert of Lost Souls. This is about a 1-minute cutscene. I'm going to skip it with editing.
Follow the song of the sirens, Kratos.
So yeah, Athena tells us to defeat the sirens so we can open the door and traverse through the desert. However, we actually do not need to defeat the sirens at all. There's conveniently a wall that we can clip through by using the ground pound ability. Which you do by pressing X and then R1 really quickly after each other. I do believe I get this about second or first try. I only lose a few seconds to this. So over here by this wall, you can ground pound into the wall like so. And there you go, I got a second try. It's pretty quick. Nothing too bad. I'll definitely take that. And right there is another skip. You're supposed to push a box over there, but again, you can do the same thing you did on the in the Aegean Sea, where you skip the box, where you can just do that jump to completely skip it. So now we blow the horn so we can traverse through the desert even more. And here comes a fight with the Sirens. And the Sirens have an introduction cutscene. I also skipped this in editing. And you're going to see right here how broken Medusa's Gaze Upgraded is. Medusa's Gaze Upgraded is Medusa's Flash, and it basically allows you to, with one flash, turn the enemies into stone. And a regular square attack will kill them after they're turned into stone. And because we have infinite magic regeneration, we can just kill all 8 Sirens incredibly quickly. So in the story, we're supposed to blow this horn, so we get Kronos the Titan to come near us, and we can enter Pandora's temple, which is chained to his back. That is a very long cutscene. I believe it's almost 2 minutes, but thank God for editing, right? Here's another mid-level loading screen that you upgrade the Blades of Chaos to almost level 3, and I'll explain why later. You can skip a 4-second observation cutscene here by doing this very tricky jump. It took me a while to learn that trick, but it's actually not too bad. And what I did right there is I clipped through the chest, or I clipped through the wall by using the chest. And what that does is, normally you're supposed to go to to a guy who's observing, or I guess guarding, the Pandora's temple, and he lets you in because you're willing to take on the temple. But you never talk to that guy because you clipped through the chest and you saw that there was like a door in the way of the temple. So these 2 archers here at the end are on a timer, so I'm just waiting for them to pop up, and then I'll kill them with the same thing as I did before. And that was a very good fight. So now we enter Pandora's temple, and the thing about Pandora's temple is this is where the run really, and I mean really steps up from the sort of silliness that happens at the beginning of the run, the sex minigame, the Hydra skip, and the roll dash canceling, and the swimming glitch, of course. All the silly stuff is kind of out of the way. This is where the big boy of the run kind of kicks in. So the first thing we have to do is we have to pull a switch to get a crank down. The crank is what rotates the Pandora's temple around, and it's also what allows us to access the Cliffs of Madness, which is one of the later areas of the game, which we'll see in about 20 minutes. So during this cutscene, I'm actually holding down on the right analog stick because it gives me a frame-perfect back roll. I don't know why down is necessarily the input the game registers as the roll direction, because the camera clearly shows that it's upright, but it's actually down. So kind of a joke in my chat is we have this crank emote that we like to post. And we all post this whenever I'm pulling the crank because I like to make fun of this game for having incredibly long sequences of pulling this crank. You have to pull this crank for 40 whole seconds, and you have to do this twice. There's another crank later on you have to pull for about 20 seconds. And that adds up to about 2 minutes. Which is crazy. That you have to pull cranks in this game for pretty much almost 2 minutes. So I make a small movement error here. I expect the camera to be exactly the same as it was here, but because I aim a little bit too far left because the floor was rotating, I miss the room by a little bit, and I start rolling into the wall, because rolling in this game is dependent on where the camera is, and not the way you put the analog stick towards. So I lost a few seconds right there. This ability is the Blade of Artemis. Combined with Medusa's Gaze, this is probably the most broken height exploit in this game. So you'll see later that I will be using this Medusa's Gaze high jump technique a lot, and I mean a lot. You can skip a lot of things using this. So in this next room, I'm going to go into the level using normal movement. Then I'm going to head back so I can, because going into this room loads the next part of the level. And when I get this right there, I turn around to load the level. And now I go all the way over here to do an out of bounds using the Medusa's Gaze high jump. So I jump onto this chest. And I clip out of bounds using the L1X trick. So I want to make it over to this door because it is the next part of the level. This jump to the sidling part is very, very difficult, by the way. I make it look a bit easier than it's supposed to be. I have to do it twice in the run, and it was one of the hardest things for me to learn to get a good time in this game. So normally in this room, you're supposed to have a boulder roll over this door so you can get the skull on the other side. But once again, we can use the Blade of Artemis and the Medusa's Gaze to gain a lot of height, and we can get out of bounds and get the skull early. So the skulls in this game open up different parts of the temple. We only have to get 2 skulls, but we need these 2 skulls to open the Cliffs of Madness. So here's our first skull. We skip a major part of Pandora's Temple by getting the skull very early. So because we are, we're not really trapped here, but the way the game intends us to go back is through a little well, but that's a lot slower than going back. That's a lot slower than going back this way. So once again, we have to do this hard jump twice. I nailed them both first try. This is a very difficult section of the run. And in this saw blade room, you have to just hope to, because the saw blades are on such a quick cycle all the time, you have to just hope to not get hit too many times, and I only got hit once. Right here, we just clip through the door, or through the floor, excuse me, and make our way back, do the same out of bounds, and make our way back to the inner ring, just like before. Flipping through the floor there is not as easy as it looks either. You have to land onto the plank, and then you have to jump off the plank as soon as you can, and that'll clip you through the floor. So I do the same out of bounds, but then I go back to, I go back around and I get around the cage. So I get back here. So now here we are, we pull the crank for yet another 40 seconds, and here comes a relatively new skip that I discovered while running this game. It's one of the only major skips that I managed to find, besides some small movement optimizers and some different ways of doing some of the Medusa's Gaze jumps. It is the inner ring ladder cutscene skip. So when we pop the skull into the door, a roller starts chasing us, and this roller is if you touch it, you die, or if you get ran over by it, you die. You're meant to jump onto this roller, and then you are meant to grab a ladder, get the cutscene, and then the roller disappears. So there's the roller. However, the cutscene is on the ladder, and because it's on the ladder, we can do a Medusa's Gaze high jump around it. So I line it up, and I do a lot of different Medusa's Gaze high jump loops here. I do these cycles. I do the L1 jump, and I jump over the cutscene. This saves about 17 to 20 seconds. And coming up right after this is what's known as the blackout glitch. So this is the cutscene where you get introduced to the Cerberus enemies. By upgrading the Blades of Chaos and reloading the checkpoint, the game sort of gets delayed and skips the cutscene entirely. The reason why that works is because the game has a different model for the Blades of Chaos level 3 than level 2. But because you're upgrading and downgrading the weapon because of reloading the checkpoint, you're kind of delaying the game into loading the cutscene. So the game prioritizes loading the model for the Blades of Chaos over the cutscene instead. It's kind of hard to understand. But all you need to know is that I skipped the cutscene there. This was one of my best parts about the entire run. As you can see on the splits, I got a pretty nice gold here. And this is a part of the run where you have to get... it's essentially an auto-scroller. The room rotates until you can reach the other side. But you can get some orb chests here. You only need 3 of them, which is why you see me not go for the 4th one here. The reason I don't go for the 4th one is because it's, in theory, it's just another way that I could die if I, you know, like make an input error on the controller or do something silly, so then the spikes will kill me. So I just don't get the last chest. As you can see, I just let it sit there. From this point on, you'll be fine on orbs. You will not be needing orbs for the rest of the game, basically, because defeating the Minotaur later on gives you a crap ton of orbs. Tiny movement errors here and there. Lost maybe about 1 second there. And this is one of the coolest scenes casually. You can see in the bottom right corner, you can see Kronos the Titan in the background, testing the PS2's limits for its time. So the next thing we're going to be upgrading is the Blade of Artemis. I upgraded to about 2500 here. And then I move on to this part. So this is the sacrifice. On the PAL version of the game, you have to burn an enemy. On the NTSC version, they have a soldier instead. So they kind of censored it on the PAL version. I'll get into it more later, but I'll talk about this skip first. So normally you're meant to get a crank to pull down one of these guys so that you can push him down. But conveniently, there's an invisible platform next to one of these guys. And you can push him down just manually. So yeah, like I said, in the PAL version, they kind of censored the soldier because burning a soldier is, I guess, sort of brutal. So they changed it to an enemy instead. So now the sacrifice is just an enemy. These enemies don't exactly get stoned from one freeze of the Medusa Flash, so I have to do the L1 square a little bit before. So you can see I wait a little bit with the slow. I don't even know what the normal Medusa ability is called, but I don't use the Flash ability until I shine it onto them for a little bit. So depending on the weight of things you like push, kicking can sometimes be faster. So right here when you're going in a straight line, or when the cage is going in a straight line, I kick it instead of pushing it. We sacrifice the enemy, and now we get Poseidon's Trident. Poseidon's Trident allows us to breathe underwater indefinitely, and it also allows us to dive. Normally you couldn't dive before, but as you saw with the swimming glitch, we clearly broke that rule just by a little bit. So here we get Poseidon's Trident. And this is one of the longest Medusa's Gaze high jumps in the run. I think it's the second longest. So what I'm basically doing is I'm doing square circle L2 over and over again to keep progressively gaining height. Now I need to swing as early as I can in my jump to preserve the most amount of air momentum. And I won't go into detail about the air momentum or the lenient air momentum at all, because it's too difficult to talk about. If you want to know more about it, you can go ahead and check out my tutorial. I talk a little bit about it. So this is God of War's water level. We actually skip most of the water level here by doing an out of bounds you'll see here. After I did this run, I was told that there was a faster out of bounds that saves about 20 seconds. I tried it out in practice, and I couldn't really seem to get it down very well, even after hours of testing. If somebody can manage to find a setup for that glitch, I may have to redo another God of War run using that glitch, because it saves about 20 seconds. Instead, I resort to doing another out of bounds further into the level, and I basically swim below the surface so I can load the next part of the level. And this is the part where the walls come to crush you. We are still out of bounds, so we basically just swim along the wall. And when we swim even further in here, I'm looking for a camera change right there. When the camera changes there, it loads the next part of the level, and it allows us to go right to this tunnel and skip the entire water level. So one thing I forgot to cover is the swim boosting, which is the advanced movement technique underwater. As you can see, I'm grabbing in the water and I'm doing a boost at the same time. After doing a normal boost, you can press circle and R1 and wait a little bit, and you can basically, with that extra grab, you can gain a little bit more distance, and then you also are charging the boost at the same time. This gains you a little bit more distance in the water. This is a forced fight with some goons. You have to defeat about 8 of these guys. I only defeat 7 because I despawned one of them because I was standing on where he was supposed to spawn. That fight went really well as well. So we go down here, and you may have not seen it, but I actually corner cut one of the jumping up into this water from that staircase. That actually skipped about a 12-second observation cutscene that's supposed to happen earlier in the game, but because we do so many glitches and we do so many things out of order, that cutscene is supposed to play way earlier. Here's another forced fight that we can skip. They just didn't extend the trigger very far there, so we just jump over the forced fight. So this is Challenge of Hades, and what you're normally supposed to do here is talk to this door, and then you start the Challenge of Hades. And once you defeat all these enemies, the door goes down piece by piece. But we can skip all of that. It basically leads you into this maze, and at the top of this maze is this button that brings up this statue, so you can light up the next room and progress through the game. We can just do a Medusa's Gaze high jump up to this button and completely skip this entire maze and the fight as well. So coming up now is a super jump out of the water. The reason I walked into the water in that specific way and I didn't just dive into it from the top is because you need to touch the ground and then go into the water for this to work. So right here I charge my my swim boost and face upwards, and I boost up into the air. This allows me to skip about 5 seconds climbing up the ladder. And right here, whenever you light this room, it loads the next part of the level. The only way to get into this part of the level is by getting this cutscene. I skipped that cutscene in editing. And right there was a small movement error, of course. The rest of the mistakes in this run are basically tiny little movement errors I do here and there. So these fireballs are on a cycle. And I have to reach this door. The third door from the left, I believe. Third or fourth one. So this one right here. So I have to roll. And then I can make it before the next one comes. They always roll in like the same way. So there's always 2 fast, one slow, 2 fast, 1 slow. So you just have to roll past the 2 fast ones, and then you can do that. You can roll into the wall and you get a little bit of invincibility frames from the roll. So you can squeeze right in between the fireball. Here I use Rage of the Gods, which is an ability I got early on in the run. Which is kind of like, if you watched my Jack speedrun, it's kind of like Dark Jack, where you just... it's kind of like a superhero mode, where you just become like really, really powerful. I do remember missing this jump once and costing me a few seconds, but it wasn't too bad because I got it pretty quickly right after. That's kind of a strange clip. You have to have like perfect height in order to clip through that log. So that's a few seconds right there. So here's another supposedly difficult platforming section in the casual run, or if you're playing casually. But we can just jump over here and use the Medusa's Gaze high jump to grab the rope right there. Fun fact, this doorway does not load if you grab the rope to load the ground. So now we've opened the door to the Minotaur, and the Minotaur is our upcoming boss. I decided to use quick rolls right here because the camera's changing a lot, and rolling around these staircases is very, very difficult to do. So for our final mid-level loading, we upgrade the Blade of Artemis right here, and it deals a lot more damage than the Blade of Artemis level 1, and we will be using that in this fight. The Minotaur cutscene is only 20 seconds, so I kept it in for this video because I also really like the Minotaur cutscene, despite having ran this game a lot of times. So the Minotaur is also a very, very glitchy fight in the speedrun. Normally what you're supposed to do is you're supposed to hit him until his... I guess you can see how there's some holes in his armor. They start steaming, and then you hit him with the log because he gets stunned from all the steam. But what we do here is we do a sort of a log loop here. So I toss a log at him, and while the log is flying over his head, I press R2 now, basically, and I'm tossing another log at him in the middle of the animation of the first log being there. So you kind of see it sort of like glitches out where the Minotaur kind of spazzes out for a second there. And it allows us to chain these logs together and hit him until his armor is gone. And that begins the second part of this fight. The second part is almost as broken as the first, as there is a sweet spot you can stand in on the mid-right here where I'm standing. And the Minotaur will attempt to slash at you, but you are actually invincible in this part. He will not complete an attack in that part. He's basically harmless at that point. And that is the Minotaur done. It's a very, very quick fight in the speedrun. I lose about a half second from forgetting to move after I toss the final log at him. You can be a little bit more to the right instead of right next to the switch whenever this happens. And all these orbs that you get after the Minotaur is enough for the rest of the game. I have about, I don't know how many I have like 10,000. And the only thing you really need now is, I think, 4,500. So I've got more than enough to finish the game. After we beat the Minotaur, we get up here and grab our second skull, which unlocks the final part of Pandora's Temple. So normally you would have to walk back down to the Minotaur, walk back down the stairs, but we're going to do an out of bounds that saves about 10 seconds or so. So we use the Medusa's Gaze high jump to clip through the ceiling right here. We get down back to the arena. We also skip a small observation cutscene where you look at the Minotaur. So here we get the Army of Hades, which is also a very, very good ability. A very, very good magic spell that will help us for the rest of the game. So once again, the game gives us a tutorial fight where we're supposed to defeat the enemies, but we don't want to do any of that, so, you know, classic out of bounds, classic God of War stuff. Just skip right over that. So I'll start talking about the Army of Hades because the next part of the game is not very exciting. You just pull a bunch of levers and you have to line up. Pandora's Temple. There's a cool boost you can hear if once you put the skull in. If you hold R1, he boosts forward like that, and it gets you to the switch a bit faster, or to the lever a bit faster. Excuse me, the crank. That took me 3 times to get right. There's a lot of levers. There's a lot of cranks. There's a lot of different things you have to pull or grab in this game. So we just have to pull this for a little bit and line up the Pandora's Temple so the diamond in that other room lines up with the other diamond in the middle. So the Army of Hades is basically just 4 spirits that hover around you, and they home in on enemies. They kind of attack them and make them bounce up and down. This is very helpful later on once we get to face the archers. We've already seen a bit of archers, but they're gonna throw. The game throws archers at us a lot later on in the run. And the Army of Hades takes care of these archers very well while we can traverse through the platforming stages. So I get notoriously screwed over here. First of all, the camera kind of changed on me. Just because I messed up some movement a bit. The camera kind of changed and messed up a bit of movement. And right here, the 5 guys that I went right past, I'm hoping right here that they won't be in the way. Unfortunately, they were, and they also hit me, so I don't go very far into this hallway. If I go far enough into this hallway to where I get the loading zone, the camera turns around. So if I don't get the camera turn around, I lose even more time. So I have to stand here, wait for the camera to reset, and then I can go for the skip. So right here, I'm doing a cutscene overlap. I'm going to wait until the dialogue stops talking over each other. But yeah, right there I did a cutscene overlap where I pulled the switch as I was meant to be halted in that little door frame. Saves about 10 seconds if you can do it right. And now we enter the Cliffs of Madness. This is, besides the Aegean Sea, the second hardest area in the game. There's a lot of skips, there's a lot of movement, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. There's some very long Medusa's Gaze high jump chains you have to do. And right here we get introduced to the satyr enemy. I do skip that in editing though. And as you can see, the Army of Hades takes care of him. And that's not a problem. So this is the first one of the very long cutscenes in the run. That cutscene is about 2.5 minutes, if not 2:40. And luckily I can skip that with editing. That is such a pain to have to watch every time. So the Army of Hades is very strong, but level 2 is just as good as level 1. Besides, we have a lot of loading screens in, or we have a lot of mid-level loadings in the Cliffs of Madness, so upgrading it is basically free because we have all the time in the world to do so. So I skipped a chunk of platforming there by jumping over that gap. And now we traverse our way in through this cave. So this is what I was talking about with the archers. So there's 4 archers here, and luckily the Army of Hades takes care of the archers well, because these archers can interrupt you trying to pull this crank, and it can be very annoying. Pulling the crank is actually almost slower than jumping across, but it just is barely faster. Jumping across there only saves about 1 second, but I do it anyway because it's pretty easy to do. So this satyr enemy trolls me a bit, and I lose a bit of time for that. Usually he's not a problem, so that's kind of a new discovery in this run. And this right here is the necklace skip. The necklace skip is the longest Medusa's Gaze high jump chain in the run. I have to do about 6 or 7 or even 8 cycles. Reset my double jump with something called the fuse glitch, where you store your double jump and you reset your air momentum, and you get a new jump, and you can do even more Medusa's Gaze high jumps. The Medusa's Gaze high jump isn't infinite, by the way. That's something I should have mentioned, because you eventually will run out of air momentum. And it's very difficult to go into and talk about what or why it's so complicated, or what air momentum is. But you basically have to imagine that the air momentum is an arc, and this arc will eventually, first you go upwards and then you go downwards. So you can do about 7 or 8 of these Medusa's Gaze high jumps before you start losing height, before the arc goes down. So this is the longest mid-level loading in the entire game. I want to go all the way down to 1,400 here because it just loads for that long. And this is the Architect's Tomb. So normally you're supposed to pull a bunch of statues around, put them on a bunch of switches, break the floor you see to my right here. But we can completely skip all of Architect's Tomb. I guess I should say you also grab a 3rd skull in this game, but we actually skip that all entirely. So up here there's an out of bounds. The ceiling just is not solid here, so we can do another Medusa's Gaze high jump here. And this one is also fairly lengthy, and it's pretty tough to learn because it's a blind jump that you have to do. But I know the hallway and I know where it is, basically at a blind angle. So I get right in just fine. And that also skips a large portion. Architect's Tomb was pretty long for me personally, casually. So that skips a lot. So I know I mess up the movement on the stair here a bit, but it doesn't matter a whole lot because there's a loading screen at the bottom that you have to sit and watch anyway. And not having to watch that loading was kind of weird, because usually I'm stopped at the bottom of that. So right here I do 2 skips back to back. Actually 3 skips back to back. The first skip I do is I skip over an observation cutscene. The reason I get hit by this roller and I hug the left side here is because this is a forced fight that you're meant to do. But by hugging the left side, you can skip the fight all entirely. So what I'm doing here is called the Pandora's Box skip. So normally you're supposed to go in and you're supposed to watch this big cutscene of you achieving Pandora's Box. You're supposed to ride this big elevator down, and then you get to this part. Once I get out of this menu, you get to this part. So you get a bunch of cutscenes, you get a bunch of dialogue and stuff like that. But by going out of bounds and falling all the way down through the elevator shaft, the game just gives you Pandora's Box. Just like that. Besides that little bit of movement that actually didn't even matter too much, but I definitely lost like maybe 2 seconds from it. And a few other minor things, like maybe 1 second to some other movement here and there. That was a perfect Cliffs of Madness. I could have not asked for anything better, basically, for this run. The end game to this run is very, very strong. It's only really in the beginning I make some tiny notable errors. Maybe some tiny notable errors in the mid game, but the end game is where it really, really is super strong. Especially Cliffs. So you have to push Pandora's Box out manually. And this cutscene, believe it or not, is actually 3.5 minutes. And I have to watch that every single time I run this game. It's very, very tedious, but it's you know, if you like the game, you just deal with it. You have to just deal with the downsides of the game sometimes. So right here, because I missed this jump in Hades, I'm behind on a cycle on these rotators. So I have to do a different segment of platforming here. And because I get hit by this spike, I'm just forced to... I try to catch up and do the right cycle, but because I got hit by the spike, I was forced to do a slower cycle. This loses me about 4 seconds throughout Hades, and it's the only mistake I make in Hades, basically. So I have to do this tricky jump around the spike. And I can skip all these rotators to my left by doing another Medusa's Gaze high jump across the scat. So right there, I reload the checkpoint because the bats tend to ignore me and tend to not attack me if I just reload the checkpoint here. So this is the biggest part of RNG in Hades. There's 6 archers on the other side, and you basically have to hope that they don't hit you while you're in midair, otherwise you fall to your death and die. I get fairly solid platforms. You basically you don't want to be waiting too much for the army of Hades to attack the enemies. You just want to try and get across as quickly as you can. So I get up onto this invisible wall. Very, very sketchy, but I managed to do it. And this pillar is notorious for being a noob slayer, and is one of the most hated parts about the casual community. But it's on a cycle, so it's actually not very difficult if you practice it a lot. So I have the first one memorized as a 4-3-3, so that's the way I jump. And here it's a 2-3-3-3-2, so 1, 2, and I do 3 here. I do another set of 3 jumps here. 1, 2, 3. Go to the left. 1, 2, 3. Go up on the next pillar. 1, 2, and I climb to the top. So yeah, it's on a cycle, so that means it's the same every single time. The way it rotates around is always the same. So with enough practice, you should be able to get up no problem. So for the last bit of Hades, we have a forced fight with all the satyrs. And the fastest way to defeat these guys is by using the Blade of Artemis and doing circle, circle, block. Because the third circle attack has a lot of end lag and is very, very slow. So we basically just want to cancel the last attack of the Blade of Artemis by blocking. On top of that, the Army of Hades, which is our magic ability, we can spam it infinitely because we did the infinite magic regeneration glitch at the start of the game. So combined, these two abilities are very, very, very useful. I don't think these fights went like super well, but I managed to get through them okay. So the last 2 satyrs, or the last 2 or 3, spawned very, very slowly, so that's why I do a Medusa's Gaze high jump there, instead of defeating the last enemies to get the platforms to raise up. So each satyr has their has a platform bound to them. So once you defeat one satyr, the platform raises up. And I skipped killing the last 3 because they spawn very slowly. So that's not a bad Hades besides the slow cycle at the beginning. And this is one of the coolest parts of the run, in my opinion, is this rope climb. So normally climbing up is pretty slow, but these jumps make the climb really, really cool. So I'm basically jumping backwards and swinging, and it gets me further up on the rope. So right here is the second blackout glitch. You saw the blackout glitch before. If you want to know the explanation for that, you can go back in the video and see exactly where that was. It's around the 30-minute mark, I believe. The 31-minute mark. So I skipped past the cutscene with the Gravedigger by doing the blackout glitch. And I skip another fight in here. And now I basically roll dash cancel my way to the final bosses. So I'm pretty nervous at this point. I find it really funny that I rolled in the wrong direction about 4 times here. But at this point I knew that it was a very, very nice run. So I had to keep it together, and I got pretty nervous and messed up some movement. Besides this movement, this actually ends up being a gold split. I don't know how, but it ends up being a gold split. So for Ares 1, for the majority of the fight, he actually just taunts you. And during this part, we can just hit him with R1 and then square attacks. And whenever he attacks, I use the Army of Hades to gain invincibility frames, so that he won't hit me again. So as you can see, I'm in the middle of doing an animation, so he can't hit me. So this was a pretty good Ares 1 fight. I get him down to this low HP, and then we have to do this little quick time event. So this is Protect the Family. Ares sends you into this sort of dream state where you are supposed to protect your family. It's kind of like a story-bound part of the game, so you have to defeat all these Kratos clones. And I'm using regular square attacks for the beginning part, and the Army of Hades, because it works best on these clones, and also the as you can see, the circle button is hovering over Kratos' wife. So if I use circle attacks at all, I might accidentally hug Kratos' wife, and that loses a bit of time. So hugs are no good for this fight, is the motto. So so after defeating Ares 1, you get a refill on Rage of the Gods. And what I'm gonna try and do here is which actually I do pretty well, is I do something called the loop. So I try and loop the same enemies over and over again to spawn in the same location. So as you can see, there's 2 guys spawning on my left and 1 in the middle. And I just keep killing the same enemies over and over again. And any enemies spawning on the right, Army of Hades deals with those guys. So once they stop spawning on the left, which I recognized right there, once I walked over there, I was like, oh wow, they're not spawning on the left anymore. I proceed to kill these guys, and I get a very, very fast ending. Another funny fact is on the PAL version, I've been noted that there are less clones in this fight, so it might actually make PAL faster for this category. So this is Ares 2. Ares 2 has 1 of 3 attacks that he can use. One of them being the teleport, which is the perfect attack, and that is the one I got in this run. So the stars basically aligned. I got very, very excellent luck on these final bosses with the best attack. So the teleport is what I got. And then there's the lunge attack and the fireball. Both attacks are pretty bad. You can make the lunge attack work, but it's better to just restart the fight in hopes to get the teleport. So now here in Mount Olympus, all that it takes is a 20-second movement section to sit in the throne. And that is time for this run. So, thank you everybody for watching. I really hope you enjoyed this speedrun of God of War. And there it is. 117.57.
And from that point forward,
Thank you again for watching, guys. If you enjoyed the content, feel free to follow me on Twitch at twitch.tv/therixer. You can also join my community and follow for more updates on my Discord and my Twitter.
they were driven forward.
Or you could subscribe to this YouTube channel for more content.
The mortal who had
All the links are in below, and I will also leave links to the live version of this run, and leave links to the God of War NG Plus tutorial as well, in case you are interested in running this game in the future. All of that will be in the description. But as of right now, guys, this is a new world record as of this run, and the first 117. So thank you all for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.